Today we're working on the standard of comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with that of another. So for today we have two paragraphs. Both of these paragraphs are written by different authors, but they're about the same event when we had the first person step on the surface of the moon. We're going to start by reading the two articles. I'll never forget the day that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. It was July 20th, 1969, and I had just turned 12. Although it took place late on a Sunday night, our time, my parents let me stay up past my bedtime to join the millions of people watching Neil Armstrong take the first step on the moon's surface. I still recall how my imagination raced. Would I be able to live on the moon one day? At that moment, anything seemed possible. Now, before I read the second paragraph, I want to think about what is the genre of this article. I notice that they talk about I, or I'll, and I, and me, and my, and a lot of personal feelings. So in this case, I know that this one is an autobiography. Because it's a personal story about his own life. That's important because it lets me analyze his personal perspective on it. Now I'm going to go ahead and read this article and think about how this author feels or how this author wrote this story. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to set foot on the surface of the moon. Astronaut Buzz Aldrin followed Armstrong onto the lunar surface 20 minutes later. These historic events were broadcast from the moon's surface and watched by perhaps the largest television audience ever, approximately 500 million people around the world. Now this article is written from a slightly different perspective. There's no I, and so I know it's not written from an autobiographical perspective. This one just seems to be presenting information, so in this case, this is written from an informational article perspective. Now what I want to do is I want to look to see what information is the same from the two articles. I notice both of them contain the date, July 20th, 1969. They both tell me that Neil Armstrong was the person who stepped onto the surface of the moon first. In this one it tells me that the specific time was 10:56. In this one it talks about how it was late Sunday night, but it doesn't give me a specific time. It talks about how it was Apollo 11 here. I don't believe that on this one it talks about the specific mission's name. That might be about all the specifics that are the same on the two. This one says it was Sunday night, and this one does say that it was Sunday. This one, when we start to look at the differences, for this one, since it is an autobiography, we're given a specific insight into the character's feelings. It talks about how his imagination was racing. It talks about how it was late. Not a specific time, but that it was late, and that kind of sets the mood. It talks about bedtime. It talks about what he was wondering. Would we be able to live on the moon one day? It talks about what he was recalling or what he was thinking. It talks about what age he was. It talks about it was a day that they would never forget. So this one is a lot more personal. It kind of sets the mood or the tone. This one ends up being a lot more factual. It introduces us to astronaut Buzz Aldrin, whereas in the first article we don't even know that there was a second person who followed up. It talks about how there was more events that followed 20 minutes later. It talks about how there was additional people who were watching this, that 500 million people around the world were watching this, and that how it was being broadcast, and that there was all the world basically following this. So our learning target was that we are comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with another. We have two separate genres here, and each of these genres have some things that are in common, and so both could be used to gather facts about the first person who landed on the moon. But they also present the facts in a slightly different way based on their perspective. If you wanted more of a first-hand approach or a personal perspective, we would end up going with this autobiography. If you want more of just the specific facts of the time, the date, the who, the when, the where, the what, you would end up with going this informational text. If you really want more of that broad picture, though, you probably want to look at both of these sources. If you take both of these sources into consideration, you would get the who, what, when, where, and what, as well as that personal connection and kind of the mood and the tone of it. So today we looked at comparing and contrasting, and we could see how informational can give us some of the facts, but autobiographical can give us more of the emotion and the tone.